It is said that our subconscious mind takes control in moments of dire physical and mental stress. I was about to die, I believed, and yet my mind seemed to be busily noting the details taking place around me. I seemed to be a disinterested spectator of my own fate. Flames sprang violently to life again, yellow, red, and licking spray.
The roof is on fire! Get out! Get out!
Light was reflected off windows while shadows edged the spattered illumination. It was a Caravaggio canvas, that scene which I firmly thought would be my last. The many and complicated details of that scene remain stamped vividly on my memory.
Leach is Ernie O'Malley, da chrógacht is don chantas sa scrí sé faoin na gascíocht le ling chogan na síirse. Ach dúmpig Aisling Village na poblachta Sheriff dó deire. Bhlaseach sé freisin pennad an grá nefciadatha do bhan I.R.A. áling Americánach.
I don't think I would have been interested in just an I.R.A. man. He was so sensitive and artistic. My life was completely changed.
Fear intlachta a behan Mailech, baile Hórelína, scrín or clasachach nárailtig ach sé her mór litsiochta a wáin le linge bheithe.
Fear on a dígrasach on a dúfachtach, gan bogu a bhí ann. Ní rá mór an trua ann de aine, ná dó héin ach irid.
Dairig leis an Máileach an dá gníomh a naime le chéile. Eisian an trodaí ach eisian an fear a thug contas na trídeanna.
His life says so much about the struggle and reveals so much about the tragedy of the Civil War.
Ba heidir ravlajaach an ciad scoth, Ernie O'Malley.
Cha Earnán Ó Maille Aistear Scéal a taide Scéal an taidúra scoláirthe sin. Ach bhóná leach mór peibli an Ernie Ceanna de Chormac.
I knew nothing of the legacies of him as I was growing up because he protected me from all of that. First and foremost, he was just my daddy, my father, and he took care of me. This is their house on Ellison Street, Castlebar, where my grandfather, Luke Malley, had lived with his wife, Marion, in the 1890s. Ernie O'Malley was the second child. He was born here in 1897, right across from the building here, which is the RIC barracks at the time.
Bhí job soccer ag Luke Malley le attorney generalta WIO.
Tháinig an Máileach as clown mianachmach. Nach náisiúntóirí a bhí ionta in éacar, nó ar a leid ní náisiúntóirí éarnacha a bhí ionta. Agus cinnte áthar agus a bháthar an am son, bhain siad leis an náisiúnachas bratanach a bhí níos leithne ná náisiúnas na Héarden.
Luke Malley would have been known as a friend of the RIC, a friend of the local establishment, relatively conservative. Parnell would have been fine. Home rule would have been fine, but nothing more than that. Father mentioned that they had no national soul, no national spirit.
Lasag spirit náisiúnta sa bhailech trí finscealta a bhuime. Bíú catha chorar san éireann. Bin an ceachta thóg sé a scealta chúchalinn agus feria.
Misty and definite, the land changed its surface in the mind from gaiety to brooding melancholy. Smells of shriveled seaweed rotting in grey dirt spew, brine, stormwood, tarred rope and riggings, sea wrack and mud after an ebb tide. Our life was ringed by the bay. It was a huge world to us.
Bhéadig a hím sa stair, agus dás mion frisasanach sa bhailech óg. Mar seo iscrí sé bonn.
As a youngster, I had the inborn hate of things English, which I expect all Irishmen to inherit. I had great daydreams of myself playing the part of a soldier, charging at the head of men, and reforming the dream until I was satisfied.
Dá go winter slán de idir na tuaithe in idiachas sa sé, vagad ar go blá clia, dúr nach raibh ach naim líana ag Ernie. Cuireadh chuig Scéal í chonaill na mráthra chríostaí é, níl an cáiliúil an náisiúnachais. Bulú ná scoláire fuirefa é dúis.
We're up into 1914, so he should be in senior year now, and here's the senior grade, and he has for the year a big F. I'm hoping F means first class, but F may well mean failure, because there is a P.
Bhláthigh sé an bhliain dar giún áfach agus bhain scoláireacht chun leise léamh san Allscoil náisiúnta.
Here he gets his honors and passes.
Gin néalta chugaigh feachtas down éireannig a arcú in arm ímpar uail na Breataine. Agus Ernie dú las tobar an náisiúnachais, de raigear ag rathar Frank gléach an rí. Bhí sé an macara i ggéin Sarawad leis na Royal Dublin Fusiliers.
Dá sé líú cúpla blin níos lúise, sé líú nógus a seacht, so ní raibh sé ach seacht blin a déag an níide cairdeag. Dá sé líú nógus a cúig beidir. Déirtu sé go méid an máileach isteach in arm na Breataine Ó Maille.
Then came like a thunderclap, the 1916 Rising.
It was something which had a dramatic impact on him. When the Rising had begun, he was rather sceptical. He thought that the volunteers were rather laughable. By the end of the week, he'd recognised that here there were people who had something he didn't have. Here there were people fighting for their nation and for freedom, and he wanted to be very much a part of that.
Distant sounds of firing echoed in my head. They made me angry. The men down there had a purpose that I didn't share. In the city, Irish men were fighting British troops against long odds. I was going to help them in some way.
Dúsigh rúd éigen ann. Nach raibh sé féin beidir lán cinnte go raibh ann agus tháinig farragar chuna bhína sasnig a glámhseáil leis na réabhlódaí.
Sprague epifina Ernie Ken Loach, nuair a rinne sé an scanán mór ratha, the wind that shakes the barley.
Get back on the train!
I'm not moving the car.
Get back on the train! Hey! Oh! Talk about like that!
Vonnig Loach, príomh character in scanáin, Maclean Leish chuechló Ernie.
There's a line in his book on Another Man's Wound in the introduction which absolutely sums up the character Damien in the film. And O'Malley wrote, "My attitude towards the fight is that of a sheltered individual drawn from a secure seclusion of Irish life to responsibility of action."
When I heard of the executions, I was furious.
From 1916, you can see the development of a different kind of Ernie O'Malley, an O'Malley who's captured by the excitement of Irish revolutionary possibility, of the possibility of fighting for the freedom of Ireland.
Hú sé stigann sin sna hóglaigh in ag éidir seachtéag, hú sé steach i gcunna na Gaeilge. Níor tháinig sé as cunna na Gaeilge, go dtí an I.R.A. amach, tháinig sé an I.R.A. amach go cunna na Gaeilge. Agus aisin amach nóig Gael dúrthúta go bhí ann.
Léirigh Ernie O'Malley a gánaíocht in a chéad bhart mar óglach. Chur sé éide ag rathar Frank an Dublin Fusilier ina rúint dó féin, agus thugaigh chaisleán bhleaclia.
I saw the heavy gates of the lower castle yard. I was nervous. This was Dublin Castle, a symbol of all that was hateful in the British domination of Ireland. The sentry at the gate saluted by touching his hand to the butt of his rifle. I returned the salute.
Déirthg sé go raibh gona uaig chun é féin a chosint na buanta poblachtacha armthe a bhí fánaíocht sa chathair.
I want a permit for a revolver and ammunition, sir.
Your name?
Jack Sheen.
Your regiment?
Royal Dublin Fusiliers, 3rd Battalion.
Sign here.
Thank you, sir.
Chris Dáníocht an óglaigh nuasa clúas Michael Collins. Ceap sé an Mailech mar eagraí míleata náisiúnta lán aimseire.
He came from outside the locality to organise, which meant that he was representing authority within the I.R.A., but also it meant that he was not one of the local group of mates. O'Malley was something of an outsider.
Chuir an Mailech a chuid stad leis feitheamh is thug fáin móthir le flosc. Díl sé a bhúthaí na samhlaíochta.
Hills, hazy purple, mauve and lavender in the distance, changing colour as the day advanced, aloof or personal, clouds forming, reforming, hanging still, drifting leisurely or moving swiftly with darkened menace. Twilight, restful ease, the clear-cut views of trees on skylines and the blurring of shapes, a swollen sun dropping slowly over the edge of sight.
His training down the country was remarkable, there's no doubt about it. His ability to organise companies into divisions and all that was, was invaluable.
He would not tolerate people who were part-time revolutionaries. He would not tolerate people who were self-serving. He thought that everybody had to be absolutely committed to the cause.
Ní raibh mór gan ag na Saidúrí nó ag na hógliaach. Higadar gur farging volta bhíán, higadar gur tróí má bhíán, ach bhí ómós acu dó, ach ní raibh gan acu Agus bhí fear bheag gan córda aige, comrádathe bhí aige.
Ceilúir Ernie O'Malley, olbhú a hin féin in idiogachtaíog mar bhandáid de phoblacht melsplach. Chuir eisreagra na Bratainine an dubh DNA. Ní raibh éon áras ach gur cogad dleathach go bhí I.R.A. ag an I.R.A.
On the one hand, he thought that because majority opinion in Ireland favoured independence from Britain, therefore it was democratic to fight for it. On the other hand, he recognised that if most Irish people don't support the I.R.A., then you can't justify the violence on that basis. But this wasn't something which he saw as an obstacle.
I was called to order for saying we had never consulted the feelings of the people. If so, we would never have fired a shot. If we gave them a good, strong lead, they would follow.
Huigus has, thug an Mailech Canasiach denúnsathe bheraicí Wínachán Tibredáin agus Límnach. Creach sé aramlan na Bratainine I Mala.
Bhí cáil mór agus bhí sin tácht go héamh icónachtia, ó héamh meanmán phobal. Bin tácht áirithe bhain leis ceapan.
Chuir trúpaí, cúltachan na bólíní agus de fórsaí speisialta an tóir Earrog Ernie O'Malley. Faoi dhearra gabhadh é I gcíl chuidig, agus thug sé enim bréagach. Ní raibh le déanamh inis ag squad céasta an chaisleáin ach an fearr agus an fabhailsgéal a ceangal dá chéile. Ba bharigh don Mailech dá na an óbhithe.
I tried to keep my eyes open. They were hurting me.
You don't talk. You'll talk. You'll talk.
He brought the poker nearer.
What do you want, sir?
My God, I thought my eyes, if he touches them, I'll jump for his throat and tear it.
Níor rish an Mailech, ach danthach enimnach in na berta a césigh sa chaisleán go Joe leis.
We gotta get nothing out of that bastard.
Glach an Mailech le prísún Kilwinain, mar heist bhreise a charachtar.
Jail brought men into arduous contact, a testing ground in which qualities were severely tried in a vacuum, to fruit or to wither.
Na manama a ardú agus an ledrán a scuile, reinar der lauir a chéile, fuair a chréast an léthóireacht rith maith istig.
They put my mind in a whirl of delight and warmth and overstimulation. I reread the books. They changed the cell.
Éilú nó bású bin I.R.A. Dairig le buan chum rádathe gunaí a bhela ó bhardéirí baúla, fágah cilíní a roscail dóibh leis. Tá rééis cúpla tep, glacadar deis lá le Valentine in idiog fe hean.
Ashford.
Déliadar agus croíag mitas poblachta eile an múr éalú. Cuireadh an tóirí an Earnán Ó Maillech, ach má bhí preis ar a cheann, ní raibh teora inis lena cháil. Fiabhra nídíodh fethe héan agus tá cogan na saoirse ina chlád le huail. Tugad ceannas dara runán an deisgirt de arm na poblachta don Maillech. Fear feirthe inis, cha sé bailí feisnéise an nabhaid ar aisiartha le hús.
For the enemy intelligence agents, things were made so hot by the threatening and shooting of spies, and even more so by the clearing out of the local I.R.A. garrison. People eventually learned to shut their eyes and close their mouths.
Ní le flasca chuig an Maillech a dehí na brúdúlachta nua.
It seemed easier to face one's own execution than to have to shoot others. My turn might come too, and soon. The night was misty. The moon shone softly through the cloud veils. Sounds carried well. Away through the distance came the lonely bray of an ass. Sheep coughed dryly in the shelter of a hedge.
Have you written your letters? If you want to send your money or your valuables to your friends or relatives, I'll forward them for you. It's okay. Let's go.
Their faces looked worn and drawn. None of them had slept.
Ní a bhóld an na hifigií gur gabhagéad na leihananta beaga salar glíag sascóric. An Maillech a chin iad a bhásal.
The light was dim. A cold dawn wind blew across the thick hedges. I placed their handkerchiefs around their eyes. One handkerchief was of silk and claret-coloured.
Ready? Fire!
The bodies lay still on the green grass. We stood to attention. Then slowly we went on up the hill across country. The sky lighted silvery grey. The wind dropped.
Mar a I.R.A. gar, heol an Maillech an Your Lady, chuig ó sin na bhar, Major King, duine den merta céisige sa chaisleán. Dúirt le King gur ghlach an trúr le bású mar haidúrí cróga. Mar ófí gíal eile man an I.R.A. rialtas na Bretaine as príosúnig poblachtacha a chur chun páis. Gléag sascóric mí bhfuil nídíodh fethe héan. Fáiltíag ribhe le flasc agus faoisimh. Guíomh san le siachán na buan, ach bhí an Maillech an áras faoi uainn a chamrádathe.
Some would compromise, I'm sure, if they got half a chance. Truce is much worse than war.
Dimig delegaid hin féin, fá ceannas Arthur Griffith go Lúndan, chun téirbí réitige idir bhartú. Níor imig dev, le bheith saor chun ghlachan nó dúltú le téirbí an réitig.
Ní difriúcht ó líocha bhí ann, difriúcht tacticúil faoi cén cad é an córéiteach is fear is féidir teach there, agus níor hiig an Maillech an concheap córéiteach an éair.
Thug an Conra, saor stát sa chó lahas de séchúnta fihid, danthach séchúnta leis an riachtaíontathe díal amach dar leis an Maillech.
I cursed loud and long. So this is what we have been fighting for. We had given ourselves to this land with death or imprisonment as reward. The dead, what did they think? I became angry again as I thought of the men who had betrayed us.
As far as he was concerned, this was unacceptable. He's one of the first people in the I.R.A. to feel that this was something against which you should fight and that you should hold out for the full republic. We'd not been fighting for partial freedom, we'd been fighting for the full freedom of Ireland.
Vagar an bretin olcog a fiach for láthirach ach hastig ó forvór an I.R.A. an Maille in a mask lenuit leis an trid.
Dá má bhíon leis na Sasannig an cúgt umlána bhí acu. Heolú a gine an I.R.A. ní bheidh seanstal leid an I.R.A. Cuma cé cróga bhí siad cuma éonmhad eile ní raibh na gunaí acu.
Glach mórach dála leis an gunra agus hiúl deviléire amach ag ceann na deachtaí frichanartha an air nídiag fihidó. Imacht arm na bretina as línach, siúd fórsaí frichanartha an bhailig in a night. Ceil siad sellh irgintí stratéisica shrúpaí an tairsteid. An dá arm in aige céile, scrí Ernie O'Malley chuig Rory O'Connor a fógart fáin man a bhágach trúpaí an stáit an fód dá. Sréanig a comrádathe agus lean siachan brisk go ceann tamil. Ní nach úna, má bhí an Maileach ceann na bhórsaí frichanartha a thóg sellh na ceithre cuairteanna im leaclia I.R.A. nídiag fihidó.
The whole principle of occupying the four ports, the more one looks at it, it was an appallingly stupid thing to do. It could never lead to anything. There were all sorts of things that could have been done if they wanted to have a counter-revolution at that time. But I think the whole concept was wrong, and Ernie was completely behind it.
The ragger an sairsteid dúlán na boblachtach éanish in a chugga caharga atara. Fósta tóir haibse an ahar tag an Cormac O'Malley stór haar luach nótaí Ernie liling an léger.
Joe McElwain, Rory O'Connor. First time I've seen this is history in the making. It's really very exciting. You can hear effectively the bombardment of the Free State on the forecourts, and they're having a meeting, a staff meeting. Supply of ammunition, 50 rounds per rifle. Thompson's 5 rounds per rifle. Lewis guns 2 rounds per rifle. Vickers 1, and this goes all the way through. Here we are, 2:30, so that must have been about an hour and a half before they surrendered.
Chin an ceannasaíocht phoblachtach I.R.A. Hit an dulgus sharaf ceannar a drugalach an garastúin Ernie O'Malley. Sa híor húhal, lug O'Malley a ríis na cosa leis slán. Dagrig sé cór frith vertíach sa chathair, ach bhí an phríomh chuimhlint boga inis hís fan dír. In a las ceann fórne, ní raibh an clús mháirige don tíochán. Hangahas a chrófalig bhóthar Aylesbury Blacklia an gahrú lásáin a nídiach fihidó. Ní bheoh éon géile an dul seo.
Surrender! No surrender here.
Cuchulainn said to Leag, "Do thou prick me on and taunt me and speak evil to me, so that the more my spirit and anger shall rise in me."
Chuiseach an dárar déag piléir in a cholan, cloch le cardan a clú. Tógah den ospedéal trám gunta.
In the actual arrest, he shot a soldier, and that, of course, made him, under the law at the time, liable to execution. My father then was his doctor, and he knew Ernie in college and liked him, really, and he kept saying that Ernie was very, very ill, which he wasn't. He came in loaded with bullets.
Vol Matt O'Connor nar choir fear go leonta le James Connolly a bhású. Dúmpar an Mailech ledar zén piléir in a green fad a bharshe.
Nídach éanú gur léic Ernie O'Malley le haid na poblatánaí fianna blianta.
Tháinig deireadh le cogaíocht de mí bealtainna. Thosaigh agóid na bríosúnach in aige gnád. Fós faoi glas, enimníoch agus tábhaigh an Mailecht an dáil, níor haithin feisireach leis áfach.
He saw himself very much as a soldier. Insofar as he was an Irish Republican, his contribution was military. He thought it was up to the politicians to deal with the details of things. There's an attraction in that, partly because he liked the romantic appeal of soldiership, but there's also a simplicity about it. If you're fighting for a cause which is fairly simply defined, you don't have to deal with the fact that there may be difficult and messy compromises ahead.
Intlet ideolach a bhí ann ó thaobh a bháin, ní intlet politicúla bhí ann in éacair. Agus caithfar an difríocht sin, caithfar béamach choir sin, mar níor a bhéon tuiscint ag mar dús don politiocht.
Bhí tenas agus cuiblinn san air, lasmuid is leistig. Dimig na mílte príosúnach Scéal an Mailech in a measc. Bhí sé marbad an á, beag beann lócilacht a leinte.
My thoughts drifted slowly. I tried to make poems of things I had loved, mountains, rivers, trees, books, and people, mingling my lines from those in a poem by Rupert Brooke, The Rough Male Kiss of Blankets, and one of Pádraig Pearse, but Holbein would intrude, with Cézanne and the glowing flame of Van Gogh. Had I not carried a volume of Blake, Dürer, and Della Francesca around with me during the hard years, I had studied them in many a strange background of mountain or bog.
Sprag stelk agrish an bhálaigh go lean dahadaithe lá, fachtas glúin Bobby Sands fiú go béal na hui. Mar is cuim le Tommy McInerney, cuig a trílar stelk agrish sa chisada.
Taresh an éacris in ar ggóil na státaitheoirí agus an méid críocht a bhí in a harp. Coupla mí in a dhé sin, thuí Ernie ar stálcócras, dochreid de cara rin Ernie.
Fágah glúin an bhálaigh gan rogha nuair a hep ar an stálcócras.
Is tóca gur chuir sé an omarcha bhéim, béim ró mhór ar an gníomhaíocht, agus nar chuir sé an éiri sin spéise sa teoiric chúlacht. An rud a dúirt Douglas de Híide Thrá, we exalted the fight and not the thing fought for. Bin an lige a bhó a bhí ar an Mailech.
Bé an Mailech an ceanar a dernach a scuid agus príosún in idiog fiche car. Ní raibhann a phablacht an ish ach Aisling.
We who had been beaten in the fight, who had withstood the jail war, parted to take up the threads of inscrutable destiny, some to begin life all over again. If I could find an acceptance of the two lives, that of the struggle and that of one's own development in the feeling of beauty and all its shades which I couldn't express, that would be an ideal.
Baul cuihiach a bes stát éireann de phablachtach sínseireach mar é. Duime sé fánaíoch san Eorp, a fála melíon is a téarnamh.
The island which had emerged in the 1920s was not the one he'd really fought for. He couldn't therefore see himself as happily existing in a partially free state. So he had to find some way of expressing and developing his interests, and I think that the intellectual and the artistic allowed for that.
I had to climb on a razor-edge crest as evening advanced. I was left by myself to read my tattered Shakespeare and study my maps.
Nuair a dil an Mailech as an Eorp heasta go de bhléire ciste ixiniú America de nuachtán nua scéala Éireann go íana fáil. Chur sé a chrost sna fíorghana, Frank Aiken is Ernie O'Malley.
They went off and started fundraising, did the Irish circuit in America. During this course, however, he took the opportunity not just to follow the Irish cause, but to follow the intellectual cause.
Cara Scorbly in the Raig is Queen le Etna Golden, Bula le Ernie don Chiadoir in Pasadena, California, in Idiok Fehanae, Job Dev Diantigan.
For Ernie O'Malley, go raibh Ella Young, scríbneoir agus Philly Earnach I Taos, New Mexico, agus ceapar go mbeag eile ábalta cabhrú thuairt dó le leabhar a bhí sé scríobh.
Tháinig Ernie timpeall Wathair Etna, chun iad go léir a hamáint ó California go New Mexico chun búla le cumann scríbneoirí Ella Young. Dhin agus thug go riadar go léir síos le chéile gar de Taos.
Bhí Ernie na gcónaí teach beag in Ainley Ling dar Eradug to the Mouse House.
Dustig Miriam an Mailech mar hagascóir dá páistí, bhí áthas a bheithú a hiileh.
Bhí na scolanna go léir I New Mexico dúnta ag an am sin mar bhí an depression siú. Muinteoir anna himiúil anna díon ling. Do it say ling one. You're the most ignorant children I ever met. That's Lobo Mountain.
Ní bhór Etna éon scoíocht eile, ach sprág Ernie chun gréiling dálam agus dornán teangacha eile. I dtaca le tagas na báistí, dhiúil Ernie a líon cultúr agus tradiisiúin in Indiach bondúchasach le fán. Bheall an siachán ann chun panaireachta é.
One of the things that he wanted to do was get some quietude in his life to write his memoirs of the Tan War and the Civil War. So he would sit there writing his poetry, his short stories, as well as particularly the memoirs.
Sprág tír grach cer dúil New Mexico an Mailech, faoi sibh ann dach síochta anama.
Here in America, I've been cut away from my own country, where I found I was developing into a symbol. This country has helped me to live my life apart from all the associative memories that intrude too much at home.
Le ling an ama seo, bhí Ernie I ggurcail cadrih Mabel Dodge Luhan an Pécalan Gostalach I glúiseacht I Mascabo Hénig. Daoine mar Ella Young an File Earnach, D.H. Lawrence an Tuaiscéalaí, Georgia O'Keeffe an Taliantóir Americanach, an Commodore Aaron Copeland, agus an Grian Grafador Paul Strand.
As I flip through the pages, having seen some of these photographs before, I came across a page which has a photograph of Father taken by Paul Strand. In fact, there's a letter here to a friend in which Paul Strand says, "I haven't met a finer person. Yesterday and today, he read from his book, which begins with his boyhood, rich in language, extremely beautiful. It is a book that should be finished and published."
Chuig sé dian an Mailech feilte hóra aimsúd an láb scríbin, cheapadar ábhéalta é agus ní a bhéan cháir an tedaldó.
People often interpret the title of O'Malley's classic book, On Another Man's Wound, to refer to the way in which one set of politicians in the Free State assumed power on the basis of the struggles of other people like Ernie O'Malley. In the book itself, though, O'Malley uses this phrase, on another man's wound, which is from an Irish proverb, "It is easy to sleep on another man's wound." He uses it in the book to refer to the way in which, as he saw it, Irish Republicans with whom he was mixing were ignoring the agony and suffering in the trenches.
We dismiss the agony, blood and misery of the trenches as we dismiss another sorrow. When I read the casualty list for news of my brother, I found friends and acquaintances amongst the killed and wounded.
Is dóilam hin gur thosig an Máileach agus gur sé de chospóirige meon na híise sin a chur an úl. An rud ar a dog sé an tré lyricúil, the lyric phase. Ní sé déanamh analís tá sé géirí mothúcháin a chur trasna.
Di mé Ernie O'Malley go nua arwach in Idiok Chocodó, chun fáilteóirí ann na chothú.
I think the New Mexican episode had come to an end, and New York offered opportunities which he found artistically and intellectually.
Níor chuir na fáilteóirí ann sim sa leabharach irid. Chuir na dúiltathe go léir as go mór dá.
During that period, he was very much a transient. He had no permanent base. He didn't have money to rent an apartment. But due to his contacts from Paul Strand and others, he floated in an artistic community in New York.
Sa chóúidir seo, bhuail Ernie le duine a chasach ar a cheanna an dealabhóir clúiteach Helen Huntington Hooker, ban I.R.A. Rockmasach as Connecticut. Ní róthóga le Ernie a bhí ahar Helen áfach.
Mr. Hooker, my grandfather, announced to the family that Mr. O'Malley would not be returning and would not be a guest in the future of the Hooker family.
Níor fuiristan ceann is fearr dail ar bhean talúil áfach.
Mother was quite taken with him and with his story, with his history, with his knowledge of art. So she was intrigued and eventually asked to do a head of sculpture. And her technique quite often was to do a head of sculpture person, and through that process she'd get to know someone.
It was a very passionate relationship early on. When you look at the letters between them, O'Malley was a quite unemotional man in most of his expression, but the letters show considerable tenderness and love.
I feel quite warm inside whenever I think of you. When I really feel anything most, I miss you most. It seems impossible to live happily without you. Please come as soon as you can.
Gan income, ní raibh seansa Ernie is sucky an chós de hir. Tháinig réiteach na feibe ar bail gan chuine. Bhí fianna fáil tar éis teachta gót sa bhaile, agus bhuladar pension de ír óglaigh mar Ernie O'Malley.
That probably was one of the pushing points to get him to leave America, where perhaps he had overstayed his visa in any case.
Lenny is garointro Ernie, hug máthar Helen thuras down de Ach bhí beartathe ag Helen teacht chun na Horpa agus rugsí na cosa lé go Lúndain. Bhuail Ernie tras na chúchaí agus fós an lá nóin ar an 27 lá bhean óir 1935. Bhí Ernie bís agus a bhrídó gáling á thuirt leis go héireann.
Helen was in a way rebelling against her American background, so there was an attraction initially for Helen in coming to Ireland as well. So both of them found opportunities, and for him I think Ireland was, as he put it, his destiny.
Chanag an cinúin sin dó nuair a fáil siamh an Another Man's Wound in Éireann in 1936 agus fan dedal Army Without Banners in America. Farag fáilte fán bhar na fáilte gáin cé múla, taobh ar taobh leis scríóirí múra na linne.
He was an extraordinary, gifted writer. He seemed to be able to carry in his mind a photographic memory of almost everything that happened to him, so that all the details could be filled in. He knew how to make words sing off the page.
Water was always fascinating to watch, running with the light touch of reflected sun on its surface or sullen from the ruffle of wind gusts. I watched it ripple over stones in the bed, and listening to its sound was drawn slowly out of myself into its rhythm.
Ach ní fada a bhair luachar an bhálig, thóg ír óglach cástarí na chuine féin agus na fáilteóirí ar an mán gur cuireadh meatacht in iles sa leabhar. Mar banóstá, has Ernie an fód.
I had to stand over what I had honestly remembered and had sincerely written.
Chail an Mailech Kerricade Pont sa Cás, Cyprus Moor an Tráshin.
He was really shocked and somewhat frightened by the prospects of writing again. The original book was written in 32 chapters, so only 22 were published as On Another Man's Wound. He certainly wasn't going to continue writing the Civil War period.
Is dócha gur cred sesin gur an rud go léir siimplí go leor, ach bháil na tíre agus an son ligant an a daoine dul raig leis sin, agus níor gádó a hiile a rá. Ní dóil am go bhfuil se sin sásúil.
He would have been among the great Irish writers of all time, and immediately picked out had he written more.
Brabús an láir imethe, fág a bhernaí níos mó ná riamh, fá go mín a gostal evanlí. Bhí a géad mac cahal in Ishacha, agus hasti gutha imachtas black lia. Vogad sheer conternov, I verden dúchis Ernie le litriocht, dalavoirecht, agus alien.
My father found this quaint old house. My mother just loved it when she saw it. Her father had died, and so she came into some money and was able to buy it.
Da voskil ailucht chuan mó, dúil Ernie sa siol toirecht. Ba vinnig alien toir og fós anahanid ina chudachta.
I remember very well on one occasion he was a very spontaneous person, Ernie, and he stood up in the boat and fell overboard. But fully clothed, Ernie swam to the side of the boat, which I managed somehow to stabilize. He was a man of considerable strength, but more importantly, great determination.
Hug Ernie love kunta de Louis in idiot da had she, haring alt dachid ard for lahan ober chara.
The article which appeared in Horizon was a very great help to me, and I appreciated it very much. He was somebody who had great feeling for art. He was very well informed, and he had a tremendous imaginative grasp.
In idiot trucanae, queer Ernie ahana Noránach elle Jack B. Yeats, nor the canic she picture wig. Cead fiasa Mailliúcháin Eline Éireann Ó Maille, cnúsa go tabreach le sár aliantóirí na linne, le Brockie, Morris McGonagall, Ménie Jellett, Evie Hone. Chuidig an Mailach le Yeats ta spanta sa chur le céile nuair a héan bunaíocht phleaclia é. I dacha le Yeats hit sé an rá le tíorgrach agus bélidas an iarthir.
He loved the country folk that he would talk to, the folklore that he would write about.
Ach bhí brú ateach ar fós an Mailach in íor gúltucht an iarthir fad blianta scuite an chugaig. Fáca a gunlan féin, dás go minic atara.
They tired of the countryside, not of the spirit of it, but of the practicality of it. Their personalities were quite different in the sense that father could live as a monk and just be there with the books and write. She was a social being because she didn't have that down here. She kept going back to Dublin.
Bhí trúr páiste cuff an drása, Cahal Étan agus Cormac agus scinnadar riad de chur Scéal im le clia. Hóg Helen take chias I glúin sceach. Ach fós hánig na cuiblintí garma atara. Vá Helen I féin sa dalavoirecht agus hug obair sa tétar hí féin leis rud nar hehan le Ernie. Bhí Ernie féin ag agurthóireacht an bell agus a créile leis an BBC.
As the friction amongst my parents continued to grow, she in fact was the leasee of the house, and she decided, since she had the house in Burshul, that she was going to give up this lease.
An tak imethe, rug Ernie na páistí leis siar, an pósa geall of her heart, did Helen Arish Verica.
These periods got longer and longer, and clearly I think that was an indication that there was a basic breakdown in the marriage.
Dear Maher Helen Ernie na páistí a chur cúig America, dúilta sé de go cáiréiseach. Bar dóibh go dóg bhí a bhosiad dar leis. Chuir sé an bheirt sinne Scéal sa Rhein chun taobh Fort Lariga chun ideach a Scéalach a chuirtáibh ribh bailcríocha chorátha sa bhreatain. Dánach I Martin Idio Chuige, Landáil Helen gan cuine sa Rhein agus dír ceadar an bríomhide na páistí a thuirteamach chun láin.
He said, I think that he couldn't let us out unaccompanied. My father had requested that, but he'd come along.
Ach chail sí an príomhide in nún Garavain agus away low.
My mother explained that she was taking us to America.
Hamain Helen gan stad go Hereford Velferiste.
Part of the reason was to be sure to be out of the country quickly because we could, I think we understood that the police might be looking for us. She had chartered a small 6-seater, 2-engine plane, and we took off with the destination of Paris.
Taréis túrlingt éigeandála sa rank agus achtraí scaun rúla eile thugadidir na casa go nua áireach leo.
We came in the back way to the apartment because the press was standing in the front lobby. And so I was aware that, for whatever reason, the American press was interested in this.
Ba scéal idirnáisiúnta an fúdach. Heb Ernie shelf dáil rís ortha in anóin brú rialtas éireann.
After that, there was obviously a total rupture of the family situation, and she was trying to evict my father from possession of the house, took father to court. The court sat on it for a year or two, the judge died, and she decided not to pursue it. So we were allowed to live in here.
Fuair Helen Colscar Americanach agus bhí 5 income ag Ernie. Thug sé fan móthir a rís, a chur an tafod scéalta a chumrádatha ó chogan na Saoirse agus cogan na Garad. Chréil sé cuidí a bheith Radio Éireann in 1953 agus dail sí cuid eile fan teidir Raids and Rallies sa Sunday Press. Chaurig na scéalta leis a chuntas cogan na Garad ag síochnú láir I.R.A. fáilte ha fan teidir The Singing Flame. Tháinig Helen ar rathruíntaine is go súil, dúirt an agalah le Cahal Shannon, gur heasnaí go hí Ernie a fósa a thuair.
I would have done it all over again because he was one of the great people I've ever really met, and to have had those years was a great privilege.
Helen wanted to remarry me, but I had enough uncertainty in the breakup of a family. Life with Helen would mean endless worry and little touch with the 2 children.
Chamain on Maille leis, glach sé post mar chóir lawyer The Quiet Man in Wio, lena hanachara an stúra Horscaman, John Ford. In 1952, thug sé Cormac chun na Franke, agus bhuailad ar isteach a hanachara Sam Beckett. Dar le Ernie láir siad mórán faoi chultúr agus eilíon, chahadar beagán, agus dóladar an tuafás. Tháinig a héal cruig in éire dúig ar an Mailech fiara. Cha sé achar fada in ospedéal in 1956. Scuile amach é fachúra me grifiúr in 1956.
I remember in March I was off at school in England, Ampleforth College. I was called home because father was sick. I just knew that he was near the end. I remember how weak his hand was compared to the strength and vitality that I had felt before. I couldn't imagine his not being there because he'd always been there for me. For the prior 7 years, he was my source of strength.
Déag Ernie O'Malley an gúigú lá fihead Marta 1956. Tugad soctrid stáid vílata dó.
I remember all the details of that day as if they were yesterday. When my father died in '57, I had no idea as to how significant he was. And suddenly, as a 14-year-old, to see the paraphernalia which is laid on by a state for a state funeral is most impressive. Most of the cabinet at that moment had reported to father during the course of the Civil War. That probably was the start of my inquiry as to who he was and why he did what he did.
He was a strange mixture of nobility, intellectual brilliance, poetic insight, and at the same time, sometimes, appalling stubbornness.
He was a fascinating person, Ernie. Unpredictable and extremely lovable.
There was a reluctance to recognise the necessary compromises in personal and in political life. There was an impatience with those who disagreed with him or those who fell short of his standards. He was a difficult man as well as an impressive one.
Bhealach déadtá rá go bhfuil oidhreacht litreatha an bháilig Tharbheith tábhachtach. Cuoinnig gur léig Sir Patrick Mayhew faoi an Máileach agus go bhfuair sé amach nuair a bhí an Máileach gonta go donna gur lééis sé son éadí Shakespeare chun faoise bhúirt ó féin agus é a feitheamh ar lucht thartháilthe. Agus chairigh an tuiscin sin go mór leis an bro sé siochána.
Has an Máileach in éadan í tiú de ghlach conra is a dahan críochhéalt. Glacha is ahantas a thugan glúiseach na sealadach I neamh.
Ag an uair sin, bhí ba cuid is mó den an tógla ag smaoinemh sna slí céarna le Ernie O'Malley. Aniu, tá cuid is mó den na public tonic ar an tír lig leis an cóhaontu Good Friday.
Ceapim gur tháinig sé an cinneadh gur is Scéal, intellectual agus I bheon agus mar sin de a rá an poblachtáin has ceart.
I think a critical element in his legacy is what he did with the pen. And the pen sometimes is said to be mightier than the sword, but in this case he caught the struggle of the sword.
I had given allegiance to a certain ideal of freedom as personified by the Irish Republic. It had not been realized, except in the mind.
Tachtan jogan be chlár fáisnéise faoin líomh bríd agan bhí beag leabhar tar éis agus má hasting with tilafáisnéise ECLT ar RC Vidalín ag www.tgcahar.ie.